Good day and welcome to lesson number 4, Paraphrasing a Text. For today's lesson, we will have the following objectives. At the end of this lesson, you will be able to define paraphrasing as a process, determine the proper ways to paraphrase, and lastly, we will differentiate paraphrasing from summarizing. So let's proceed to the first question. What's paraphrasing as a process? This was taken from Owl Purdue, and they define paraphrasing as one way to express a text using your own words without the need to quote materials or statements directly. Why is this so? Because a paraphrase is your personal version of a borrowed text. Now, please remember that this is not a summary of a text, but a restating of the points of the original text and the main ideas presented in that text. And that one is made by a different author. And because we paraphrase, it helps us as authors to limit the quotations placed in his or her output. It might be seen in this slide alone that there's a repetition of the mentioning of direct quotations. So what happens when we use too many direct quotations in our essay? When we write academic papers and we use, or in this case overuse, direct quotations, the output itself becomes impersonal and it starts to sound like a newspaper article. And we can't have that in academic writing. No, this is not journalism. This is an academic paper. And as such, we need to be able to make these outputs, these materials, these essays as our own. We are not going to claim their ideas, but we are going to allow our readers to understand and to see that we have understood the original materials by being able to rephrase those original statements and make those statements our own. So it's like you giving a whole different spin to an original material. And that in itself is why paraphrasing is very, very important. So how do we paraphrase? Well, there are 5 steps presented, and it begins with you reading the original material multiple times. Again, as mentioned in lesson number 2, it is important for you to be able to get a good understanding of the original material, and that can only be done when you have read the material multiple times. Okay? And while you are reading the materials, you can also take note of the main points made in the original passage. And you can do this 2 ways. One, you can highlight the key points, you can highlight key ideas, key concepts, or you can annotate. You can write them down at the borders of the book if it is yours, or you can have a separate sheet of paper for your annotations. Now, once you have created your annotations, or once you have highlighted the key points or the key ideas made in the original passage, and after you have read the material multiple times, it is now time to create your own version of those main points and then restate the supporting details again in your own words, the ones found in your original text. And it doesn't stop there. Once you have created your paraphrased version, your own version or your reworded version based on the original text, you have to be able to compare your paraphrased version with that of the original version. Why is that important? Because we have to check whether the original message is retained in the message in the original version is retained in the paraphrased version. If you have achieved such, then kudos, good job. Last but definitely not the least, do not forget to cite your sources. This is an academic paper, and as such, citations are very, very important. But this is all theoretical. I'm going to show you how we can apply the concepts in the previous lesson, outlining a text, in this particular lesson, which is paraphrasing. When you annotate and when you take note of the main points, you can begin by using an outline. Okay, so in this format, you can see that there's a main topic and that I have presented the correct or the suggested way of developing an outline. Roman numerals for main ideas, big or capital letters for subtopics, and then numbers for examples. Now, take note that you're going to use this material, this outline, and you're going to place the actual components from the original text here. You can make use of a topic outline first. So the topic outline, you're going to retain the original words of the author, the original ideas. But when you create the paraphrased version, when you expand those, or when you begin to reword those original statements, you can proceed to the use of a sentence outline, but this time you are going to rephrase the concepts found in the topic outline, but you're going to use full sentences. And after you have created your sentence outline, you put the sentences together, and then you have formed a paraphrased version of the original text. Again, we compare your paraphrased version to the original version and check whether the message has been retained. So that's one way of applying the previous lesson and creating a continuity from previous lessons to new lessons. But when do we not paraphrase, or when is it considered not paraphrasing? Okay, there have been many speculations, but it is not paraphrasing when all you do is substitute words. Again, it is paraphrasing, not substituting. When all you do is substitute words using their synonyms, and this is the common practice. We take out words and then we use synonyms and hope that that is a viable paraphrase. But that is not a paraphrased version. You are merely substituting certain words, but you are not paraphrasing the passage, just substituting certain vocabulary items and then passing it off as a paraphrase. Okay, that is not paraphrasing. Next, when you are tempted to use a paraphrasing tool, and that can be very, very tempting, I suggest, especially to my students, that you don't use paraphrasing tools as your first recourse. No. Why? Because paraphrasing tools might teach you to become lazy and depend on them all the time. We are developing a skill here, and because we are developing a skill, you have to learn how to paraphrase on your own without the aid of softwares or applications. Do it your way first, and then the paraphrasing tools can come after. Okay, so what you do is this: you have the original material, you paraphrase it on your own using the format I gave or using the outline I gave. And then after which, you take the same material, the original material, and run it through a paraphrasing tool or a paraphrasing software. You then compare your paraphrased version to the version of the paraphrasing software or the paraphrasing tool and see if the message is the same. If it is the same, then use your paraphrase without the paraphrasing software or paraphrasing tool. The tool is just there to check whether you have a good grasp of what has been discussed in the original material. If you already do, then you don't need a software to help you paraphrase the materials in the future. Okay, so it is your own words and not the words of a paraphrasing tool. So, sir, what's the danger of using a paraphrasing tool? Paraphrasing is done so that you can simplify further the concepts found in an original source. Now, when you use a paraphrasing tool, the software might not give you an easier or simpler version of the original text, which is why it is very risky. It is better to depend on your own skills as a writer to paraphrase a text, because you know that you can simplify it and you have a knack, an instinct for simplification. A software does not. The software might do what most people do: substitute words, shorten sentences. But in your case, you are capable of changing the structure and the wording and the phrasing based on instinct and evaluate whether that is a simpler version than the original text. Again, we are aiming for simplicity. So if it is simpler than the original text but the message is the same, then you have created an effective paraphrase, which is not assured when you use a paraphrasing tool. Okay, so allow me to draw the line. When is it paraphrasing and when is it summarizing? This table shows you a comparison, not necessarily a contrast, but a comparison. For summarizing and paraphrasing, the versions, your versions do not match the source word for word. Why? In summarizing, it is a shorter version. In the paraphrase, it is a simpler version. So the words are not the same. But for summarizing and paraphrasing, summarizing focuses on the more general and broad view of the text from start to finish. But for paraphrase, they might pick on a specific passage, a specific part of that text, and then paraphrase that text. It does not look at the text in its entirety. But for summaries or for summarizing, we look at the entire text as a whole. Now, that being said, summarizing and paraphrasing are also similar based on attributing to the original source. Both will always cite the original source because they are both academic papers. So, what's the stark difference between summarizing and paraphrasing? In summarizing, we shorten the text totally, and in paraphrasing, what we change is not the length, but the way the text is worded and the way that the original text is structured. We change the words and the structure in the paraphrased version, but not exactly the length. Okay, so to prove that, we have a sample passage here. You can pause this video and just read through the original passage. This is a legitimate paraphrase. Now, I understand that this might look far shorter than the original passage, and that is a very valid observation. But as you can see, the reason why this looks shorter is because they restructured the sentences and they reworded the original passage for it to be simpler and easier to digest. So you can also pause this video if you want to read through the legitimate paraphrased version. So I believe that at this point we have already gone through the following objectives. We have defined paraphrasing as a process. We have determined the proper ways of paraphrasing, and we have differentiated paraphrasing from summarizing. And with that, I believe that concludes our lesson for today. Again, this is Sir Dardar wishing everyone a great day. Class dismissed.